You're probably familiar with the phrase, a bird in hand is worth two in the bush. But what about 10 birds in the bush? Or 100? The point is, eventually, the skilled hunter would trade his current bird for the potential for more birds. It is worth the risk. That's time preference. What's my preference for goods now versus goods in the future? Like all of us, time preference is not static, it's dynamic. Time preference is influenced by the present, how many birds do I have? The past, how many birds have I managed to successfully hunt before? And also the future, our expectations for potential gain. A central authority like the Fed setting those rates is another obvious example of people imposing their subjective values on the rest of us. Of course, this is precisely what the Fed has been doing our entire lives by trying to manipulate our behavior through its control of interest rates. But its argument is this: the Fed doesn't manipulate the economy, oh no, it's merely finding the perfect neutral rate that creates a Goldilocks economy. One where the economy is neither too hot nor too cold, it's just right. This chart from Jim Cramer's book Real Money from about 10 years ago is actually a great example of this. While I enjoy Jim's takes on the stock market, for our purposes here, I'm just going to rather inelegantly block out all of the specific stock-related advice in this chart, and we'll just stick with what's really important here. First of all, what is annual GDP growth, you might be asking? Well, gross domestic product, or GDP, is the government's attempt to measure the entire economy. And obviously the percentages there along those lines are the percentages that it grew from the previous quarter, month, whatever it might be. On the left side of the chart, notice that GDP is slowing, and once it gets below 1%, that's when the Federal Reserve decides to step in and begin a series of easings, which is also lowering interest rates. Then you get around the other side of the curve, which is when the economy is growing. And notice, once they get above 3%, the Fed starts getting worried again, but then it's not about the economy slowing down, it's about it getting too hot, if you will. See, this is where the Goldilocks effect comes in. Once the Fed gets above 3%, they start saying, hey, we need to start tightening or raising interest rates in order to slow that GDP growth. In short, this neutral rate, assuming the Fed is able to discover it, is not distorting the free market exchange between lenders and borrowers. Well, I have some questions for this theory. If this neutral rate doesn't alter free market price discovery, then what's the point? The Fed's own targets, which are often price inflation, notably in housing, and the unemployment numbers, proves they are looking for an end result and not just whatever the market will bear. Second, from the lenders' and borrowers' perspectives, do all loans carry the same risk? Let's remove the bank and make it as clear as possible and use two people, because relationships are vital to understanding any person's economic calculations. For instance, let's say I'm an athletic trainer for the Cleveland Cavaliers, a professional basketball team. Like all organizations, the Cavaliers have a hierarchy, with owner Dan Gilbert at the top, followed closely by LeBron James, the face of the organization and arguably the entire league. On the bottom, you might have some young, unpaid interns tasked with logging hours of video for the players and coaches to study. And then in the middle, you've got hundreds of people working security in the arena, the ticket offices, the concessions, and in this example, a trainer. Now, clearly, if I, the trainer, am stretching out LeBron's hamstrings before each game in practice, then we have a relationship. So what if I ask LeBron James to borrow $20? I imagine he's probably going to say, sure, dude, here you go, as I imagine he unfurls a massive wad of money and charges me 0% interest on my loan. Obviously, as a very wealthy man, the risk LeBron takes is essentially zero, as $20 means nothing to that man, relatively speaking. Now, even if I have zero intention of repaying LeBron his money, making my risk of default 100%, his risk based on relative wealth is negligible. Now, having said that, this is where relationships come in. If I don't pay LeBron back the first $20, what are the odds he's going to lend me another $20? Probably a lot less, right? Because then it's less about the $20 to LeBron and more about our relationship. You've heard the phrase, "my word is my bond." Well, on the other hand, perhaps LeBron writes it off because I'm such a good trainer, he'll allow me to be a cheapskate and be evasive with money. It's the cost of doing business, if you will. Notice all of these possible subjective values at play in LeBron's head for a relatively simple decision. Now let's say I, the trainer, ask an unpaid intern for a $20 loan. Let's assume this is a young person with little to no income. The risk to that person never having his $20 returned is exponentially higher than LeBron James, so it's safe to assume that that person is going to have a far less casual relationship with the $20 and far more questions for me, the borrower. Like, what do you need my $20 for? And when exactly can you pay me back? This person will also be subconsciously calculating our relationship and his perception of my trustworthiness. And what is my previous history of borrowing? If I've borrowed $20 from the intern before and paid it back quickly, then he's more likely to let me borrow in the future. You could accurately call this credit. But again, the Cavaliers are a big organization, so what if I've never met this kid? If we have no relationship, this relatively poor youngster is likely to tell me to take a hike. But what if I'm like, hey, look, man, I just need the $20 right now, and the ATMs are closed. If I pay this parking ticket in cash today, it will save me on a huge late fee, okay? So, look, if you can just give me $20 now, I promise I'll give you $40 a week from today. Whoa, okay. Now the intern has a dilemma. He's thinking, I'm not sure I trust this guy, but a 100% interest rate for a week of lending is not a proposition that comes along too often. So, based on all these factors, the intern must decide if a 20 in the hand is worth two 20s in the bush. So what have we learned here? Even if the thing being lent, $20, is literally the same, the participants in every loan are not. You see, each human is a unique input with different subjective values. They have different time preferences and risk tolerances that are always subject to change. That means that the Fed and Keynesian followers' assumption that all loans should be created equal is absurd on its face. It's also a prime example of Keynesians attempting to do math for an entire country. While supply and demand are as inescapable as gravity, that's where most of the similarity to science ends. You see, figuring out future economic realities is based on educated guessing. 2 + 2 = 4 is perfection. But when we're dealing with future outcomes, by definition, we're talking about a world with imperfect information. I can easily count the number of apples currently in my refrigerator, but that number does not precisely tell anyone, even myself, how many apples I will possess on the same day 5 years from now. In other words, while it's possible to precisely calculate current supply with mathematical precision, one cannot count demand at any time, nor supply in the future. The Fed's central control of rates and the money supply has huge effects on the economy and our own money and wealth. And I'll visually show you these effects with some hot money balloons next.